this is a spoiler,
You can't
you
listen to
know.
this and not have spoilers.
Actually, I went back through it, and Laura suggested it offhand. I
Oh,
ratified it. Daniel said yeah. You said yeah. So there it is.
There
It's
you
like
go.
a hot
Okay.
potato.
you're putting it back on me.
Well,
Well,
I'm just reading the documents.
yeah.
Well, I think the reason you said that, Laura, was because I said, "Oh gosh, I feel like there was so much we didn't cover."
And you're right. There is. I'm thinking, since this is a part 2, I don't have to do what this story is about.
Of course, yeah. This is after dark now.
This is
Okay.
the
Get
after
comfortable. I'm trying to think of like an appropriate way that everybody likes to get comfortable, and I can't think of one.
Okay.
I was like, light up a cigarette, pour a drink,
right,
you know,
right.
All of the
slip into a
above.
robe. Yeah.
Well, I mean, the one thing I do know, and maybe this is what you saw in the documents, Nathan, but the one thing I do know is that we didn't discuss the insomnia plague. We didn't discuss the 4.5 years of the flooding. And I guess we didn't really go deeply into the whole military action that took place that pulled Oriolano into becoming this sort of war hero.
Oh no, yeah. If you're trying to put stuff out on the canvas or whatever to
Yeah,
like
that's
start
what I'm doing.
like everything on the table, then yeah, I also had been thinking of. I'm pulling up the family tree or whatever because it's difficult to get. I still can't detect everybody's lineages. But one thing that was interesting, we had kind of talked about how characters had these arcs, and I thought that it was really interesting that Rebecca, if I'm remembering the Earth-eating child,
Yeah.
went back into the Earth at the end dramatically. I thought that was interesting. Also talking about, you know, the pig's tail and how that came back around. Maybe not a theme, but that was explicit. And then maybe just other people that got me thinking about, damn, how everybody else is connected. Like the twins getting mixed up all the time and then also mixed up in their burials, etc. You know, I feel like there's more of those things to go around. So that's kind of what I'd put out on the table.
I think we should just pick one and talk about it.
Okay, so what I did, obviously, I looked at a couple of secondary sources, but back to reality before I do that, I'm going to just bring you to the insomnia plague where everybody, and also I think the insomnia plague touches upon probably the primary theme of this entire novel. And that is, there is this plague that develops, and I think people started thinking it was passed through eating or drinking. People started not being able to sleep. And the thing is, what was weird about it is that they felt physically fine. They would go 1-2 days, feel fine, feel rested, even though I haven't slept. But they started losing their memory. And that, to me, ties into one of the main themes of this, if not the most important theme of this novel. Anyway, I'm going to read a little bit to sort of get us back on track with this. Okay, so
Can you just give me a reference of a page number when you start?
I think it's chapter 3. Go halfway into chapter 3. I don't have a page on this. It's no one understood Vistiacion's alarm. If we don't ever sleep again, so much the better, Jose Arcadio Buendia said in good humor. That way we can get more out of life. But the Indian woman explained that the most fearsome part of the sickness of insomnia was not the impossibility of sleeping. The body did not feel any fatigue at all, but its inexorable evolution toward a more critical manifestation, the loss of memory. She meant that when the sick person became used to his state of vigil, the recollection of his childhood began to be erased from his memory. Then the name and notion of things, finally the identity of people, even the awareness of his own being, until he sank into a kind of idiocy that had no past. Jose Arcadio Buendia, the father figure, dying with laughter, thought that it was just a question of one of the many illnesses invented by the Indian superstitions. But Ursula, the maternal figure, just to be safe, took the precaution of isolating Rebecca from the other children. Rebecca was that adopted daughter. Anyway, those who wanted to sleep, not from fatigue, but because of nostalgia for dreams. I'm jumping between a couple of quotes just to get us onto this. Those who wanted to sleep, not from fatigue, but because of the nostalgia for dreams, tried all kinds of methods of exhausting themselves. Anyway, they were not allowed to eat or drink anything during their stay, for there was no doubt but that the illness was transmitted by mouth, and all food and drink had been contaminated by insomnia. Then I'm going to go on to what happened in terms of what Aureliano felt. This is son of the major father figure, what he felt was going to be able to help them. He had his own little workshop, as you recall, I think he was making silver metal things before he started making the goldfish. In his little workshop, with an ink brush, he marked everything in the house with its name: table, chair, clock, door, wall, bed, pan. Went to the corral and marked the animals and plants: cow, goat, pig, hen, cassava, caladium, banana. Little by little, studying the infinite possibilities of a loss of memory, he realized that the day might come when things would be recognized by their inscriptions, but that no one would remember their use. Then he was more explicit. The sign that he hung on the neck of the cow was exemplary proof of the way in which the inhabitants of Wakanda were prepared to fight against loss of memory. This is the cow. She must be milked every day so that she will produce milk, and milk must boil in order to be mixed with coffee to make coffee and milk. Thus they went on living in a reality that was slipping away, momentarily captured by words, but which would escape irremediably when they forgot the values of the written words. Then we get to how this plague was cured. This old, curious man shows up at the door, and I guess Jose Arcadio Buendia opens the door to him. And this old, strange man says he gave Jose Arcadio Buendia a drink of gentle color, and the light went on in Jose's memory. His eyes became moist from weeping, even before he noticed himself in an absurd living room where objects were labeled, before he was ashamed of the solemn nonsense written on the walls, and even before he recognized the newcomer with a dazzling glow of joy. It was Alcides, the gypsy, kind of started all this wild magic at the beginning. But anyway, the thing that about the Insomnia plague is really important is the loss of memory, and I think that the loss of memory and the regaining of memory and memory throughout the novel is just critical. Because, and I read about that in this research journal of language, literature, and humanities, where they were talking about how the language structure and hierarchy of meanings can only be preserved through memory, eradicated by forgetting. So memory, like we all know, is critical in many levels of life, but I think this novel brings it to a really critical point in that it shows how these people can't live without, they can't exist, they can't continue without their memory. And even their memory, when it comes back, seems to be not quite reality, but it works for them in a magical way, you know?
I mean, to my mind, potential connection with the rest of the novel. I mean, what I wonder about is sort of what is the connection of the memory plague to the rest of the novel, and how does this sort of theme resonate with the rest of the novel?
Well, if we're going to, I just would put a little guidepost down where you're talking about, and then maybe we can go back to Insomnia rather than leave it. But I would put alongside this alternate route by the rains for so long. That's another event kind of thing in the town where it seems to happen globally. I mean, speaking in terms of the town, where everybody experiences something. And I'm not sure what that is. We can talk about that. I think it's completely separate, but I think tied in with maybe what are the relevances between these things. Maybe that will ultimately get us to a third thing, which could be the military action that we wanted to talk about later. But sticking with the Insomnia, yeah, I mean, what's going on there is interesting. We could talk about that. It's memory and death, maybe. Didn't Malchiades come back from life? That might be worth investigating. But maybe I'll throw that back to you, Daniel. Do you think that's...
Yeah, I wonder about Melquiades, because he's the guy who, in a sense, wrote the book, right? I mean, at the end of the novel, he is the guy who kind of established, who wrote the history, except it was a prophecy at the time he was writing it.
Just to be clear, that's distinct from the authorial voice, which is above that in a third thing, because it's looking at that object being understood by someone, the authorial voices. And then also, interestingly, Marquez himself, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, is a character in this novel, which is, got that whatever thing that, is all over the place now in modern stuff, where you see your author inside somehow.
So I think it's good to think about this in connection with the Rains. If I'm remembering the Rains episode correctly, it was that whole thing where after the strike, the company kind of promises to give benefits after the rains, and magically, as a result, it begins raining continuously and people subsequently forget that the atrocity that was committed by the banana company. And so, I mean, there's an obvious connection with forgetting in that regard. I also, so one thing I did while on my, between the two sessions was read Labyrinth of Solitude, and which by Octavio Paz. I had mentioned it earlier as a possible connection, and he has a theory about how the Latin American peoples are sort of orphans and disconnected from both the Spanish and their indigenous past, and how this causes all sorts of problems. So I kind of wonder to what extent that whole larger historical context is connected to this theme of memory.
I didn't realize that the rains were in connection with the forgetting and the military action. Is that right, Jennifer, Laura? Do you remember it that way? Because I had a different mechanism for forgetting, which was basically like mass coercion.
Yeah,
And
I didn't.
I thought it was earlier.
I didn't
before.
make a direct connection between. It wasn't even that I thought that they forgot. I almost feel like there was a certain level of gaslighting happening.
Yeah, that was my take also. And so
Okay.
I didn't think it was connected with the rains.
Well, and I mean, the rains happened around the same time, and you kind of get the idea that because the rains came, not only did the reprieve from the company come that they had promised, but also it sort of kept everyone separate. And so when people isolate themselves, when people don't get together as a community and talk and discuss those they all sort of kept a secret, right? I mean, I don't know. That's part of the debate was, did they keep a secret, or did they just never know because they didn't see it? Or, what really happened? Is he the only one that really knows? There's kind of this sort of lingering question around that entire event. And the way that he wrote some of the things, like when he came back, there was a woman he spoke to, and she was so precise in her language about something like nothing ever happened, or do you remember what happened? I can't remember where it is, but do you know the part I'm talking about where he talks to the woman after he comes back off of being on that long train ride? And she's like, no, I don't know what you're talking about. But the way she said it is almost like she's keeping a secret. It's the thing that shouldn't be spoken of. And then with all that lack of discussion around it, because the rains kind of kept them all isolated from everyone else, that just dies. And it's, to me, if I'm making a connection between that and memory, is that you can write whatever you want to write in history books, but what really holds a culture together is their ability to pass down sort of the feeling and the emotions that came along with events. So we might have a very clinical view of like World War II, but if you've got a grandpa who's still alive who fought in that war, you have a much different version of those events. And as we move further and further away from an event, we don't have those people passing down that kind of information in the way that can only be done through the passing down. Then we lose a lot of what happened. We lose the real sense of what happened. And I think for me, the memory loss kind of acted like a microcosm of that.
On page 309, the end of the first full paragraph, the paragraph is discussing a potential deal between the strikers and the banana company. And then the last sentence, it says, except that when the military asked him on what date they could announce the signing of the agreement, he looked out the window. I think this is Mr. Brown, the banana guy. He looked out the window at the sky, crossed with lightning flashes, and made a profound gesture of doubt. When the rain stops, he said, as long as the rain lasts, we're suspending all activities. It did not rain for 3 months, and there had been a drought. But when Mr. Brown announced his decision, a torrential downpour spread over the whole banana region. That he's laying the signing of the agreement based on the rains until the rains end, I guess. And that's why there wasn't a deal.
Wow.
Apparently.
Okay. Yeah. So that's not so very different. It's not that somehow they're connected with generating the rain magically or something to keep this from happening, or to be a gift somehow, from the great machine company that's coming down the river. It's more that it was a kind of like a simple dodge that ended up being because of like a disastrous freak occurrence more than what anybody knew to expect, right? Because he didn't know about the rains. He's just like, let's punt. It's going to rain soon, so we'll do it after that. And then turns out they get a little bit of a boon that has nothing to do with the. I'm just trying to sketch this out. But that makes more sense because it doesn't. Okay, yeah.
But wait,
because certainly I remember him looking off in the distance and being like, just later. They don't really want to do it, you know.
But they really never. But the Rains, I guess I'm kind of a little lost. The Rains never were related to them. Like they never admitted fault. They never admitted that this thing happened. Like to this point, up until even at the end of the book, the thing that seemed what happened to me is that he witnessed an event.
Yeah, totally.
No one else ever saw, heard, mentioned, or admitted to.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's all in keeping. I think these are not actually, the rain isn't necessarily connected with that episode of forgetting, but it is connected with this episode where forgetting happens.
Yes, that's what I kind of got, because I knew the deal was delayed because of the rain, and it almost seemed like they had magical powers to make the rain last for long enough so that people would, forget.
But isn't rain in and of itself a metaphor? Rain washes everything away.
Yeah, but it's not applied as a metaphor. So when does the raid incident happen? Because that would be interesting, because like the metaphor, I'm not sure is talking about that incident yet. I don't think it has it within its, if it were that grasp to be, where does the military aid come in with that decision? I'm just forgetting it.
Prior, actually, right?
Yeah, military raid happened. You mean like whenever they came and shot everybody?
Yes.
That happened, like 7 pages before. That was the impetus to this entire thing, right?
Got it. Yeah. So, I mean, that does suggest like a metaphor that like, though it's not in their control, that this is just like things went on. There were indefinite promises. It was really bad. And memory is muddy.
So, there was like, basically the workers were unhappy. They were going to strike or petition for more money. They were closed in. They were all killed for some reason or another. He was the sort of either the only sole survivor or the only one that didn't get the memo that you shouldn't talk about it. He ended up on dead bodies on a train, right? Got back, and there's this sort of party line of like, this is a happy town. Nothing has ever happened here. I don't know what you're talking about. And everybody's like, there's a couple people that repeat that phrase, and I wish I had an electronic version so I could have highlighted, but it seems very much like this is the phrase that we're saying, and we're repeating it so that we all have the understood message of like, this shall not be discussed. And then I get a little confused about what the agreement was supposed to be about, but there's still, even after all that, there still was no admission of killing all the people, right?
Yeah.
So wait,
can I just say?
Yeah, so go on, Lauren.
I'm sorry, but it's not just that there wasn't an admission, but then later, I don't know if it was Jose Arcadio Segundo, maybe it was, the only survivor, when he went to talk about that mass extinction, everyone was like, what are you talking about? That never happened.
Yes, exactly.
I mean...
Yeah, but I mean, so all this still makes, this actually just deepens my understanding. I thought that maybe there was more than coincidence with the military company, like the suggestion that somehow they were making the rains or something. That's what I was taking issue with. But yeah, all this stuff about, a bad thing happened, how it happened, and, the rains, and then, both sides just moving on. And like, yeah, this tells a story through time about history and how it's written. And it really gives us that clue because we have the one subjective truth of his experience being surrounded by it, seeing it. And then, our horror as a drama, seeing that everyone else is like, what are you talking about? They're doing that because they've been violently oppressed. They kind of got the material thing that they wanted, which was rains in the first place. And it's not really worth taking back up a fight. You know what I mean? Like, so all this stuff makes sense.
Daniel, can you, it seemed like you were about to clarify what is the agreement, because I actually forgot. I'm looking through.
Right. So I'm reading through this passage again, and I think the basic idea is that the union leaders had reduced their demands.
Oh, right.
2 points, and so even after they're not like Happy Town, right? And they don't even remember the fucking massacre, right? They're gonna make these. They just want these 2 little demands, and the banana company can't even agree to that. Like their agreement is contingent on the rain. Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is keeping with, forgetting in that as well with, just I'm looking parallel here now again. So Ursula's whole worry about the pig baby being born, she's gone by the time that happens, and no one really knows about that anxiety with the family lineage. And then you know what I mean? And then it happens, and the child's dead and forgotten. So we can see this like story again about time, just tracking this people know, forgotten, sweep of time, like what's going on issue that I think we just highlighted with the people and the reigns and the government, is that Ursula knew that she was worried about an incestuous deformation, the pigtail baby.
And that was
she was
very early on.
Yes, yes. Oh yeah, I'm just making, again, a parallel argument here for how this is thematically talking about time and memory and forgetting and death. So she knows that, goes through her life worried about it, and there are reasons to be worried about it. She dies. Those reasons keep continuing, and no one knows about her worry. But the kids are still incesting each other and all that stuff. And at the far end, you finally get her nightmare, the child being born with a pigtail, but no one knows about it. No one around knows that was a concern all along. 7 generations of
everyone's
making.
dead.
Exactly. And yet you still get the child to be born, and it is tragic, you know, and so you have that whole maybe ontological issue there with like, what's the child's perspective as it's being, you know, killed or whatever, you know, and then the father's perspective as he abandons the child in his grief, you know, because that kills the mother of this child. It is a big tragedy, but no one knew about it. It's just playing out really for them. So there's like levels of irony or drama going on here, and that lets us see beyond an individual lifetime.
Forgetting is a kind of solitude, isn't it?
Yes. There's an exact quote going on about that.
Absolutely.
And I get the idea that, you know, each of these characters, you know, has their own version of how you can be, you know, in solitude or really isolated in life. And these ways in which you do this, you know, it's kind of just a lack of communication, right? If you don't communicate what you know, these things can happen. And it seems as though with the memory and with the rain and the whole banana situation, that because these characters are not communicating what they know, again and again we see, like, if you do not know your history, if you do not understand your history will repeat itself. You know, that's kind of, it seems like to me this sort of overarching looming message of knowing where you come from and knowing the history of things, and the importance of not rewriting history to make it look nice and neat.
Well, again, I'm not sure. I take one, I'm not sure how much that lesson can be used, you know, like that's one thing. Like this seems to be beyond, maybe it's arguable, it's beyond people's control, like within this story, to have done things differently. Maybe this is more of like a cautionary tale to try ourselves or something. But I was just thinking another one would be like Rebecca, you know, like she, just like another story of this like issue that doesn't have to do with communicating, but she has her own solitude. I mean, she's abandoned as a child, wants to make connections presumably, but is left alone, you know, have to eat earth and stuff to survive, is found, brought in, gets the biggest guy in the world to look after her, and that's her biggest joy, and then that's taken away out of her control, and then she's left to the solitude again and basically returns to the earth, being, you know, consumed in her house. So again, I just see these things happening, but yeah, Jennifer, do you ever, I mean, I'm not trying to like, I mean, I take your point, but I just don't know that it can be applied neatly around the book. I'm not sure. Maybe there's something more, I guess, or maybe there's issues with that.
Yeah, I'm trying to find where we learn about when we meet Rebecca.
Yeah, it was like her parents were attacked on the route somewhere, and she was, is that something like that, or were given up?
Yeah, and I don't remember where it is. I wish I could go to the page if you guys know where Rebecca's first introduced. But there's like a mystery around who she is and, you know, what her family is from and why she's there. There's a bit of a mystery there.
Yeah, and I think that it's solved. It does, yeah, Laura.
Yeah, I think her parents were dead, right?
Wasn't there an icon or a relic or like a coin or something that was along with her or something like that, that was like the only indication of that she was actually aristocratic? I think that it was like a well-to-do family on the move, and in that move they were beset by thieves or something. Like if Rebecca was a runaway who wanted to get away from her parents and got lost, that's a completely different metaphor than, you know, a child being left.
She was carrying the bones of her parents, though. I mean,
yeah, that's the bones, and the bones were in the house. Oh gosh, yeah.
There's something that I'm not going to make any sweeping statements about what the theme of this book is, but I definitely think that there is a huge repetition of people not sharing information and it being a problem. It comes up again and again. It's like they isolate themselves. They go off into these separate corners. They don't talk about things, and you just kind of think, hey, there's just a lot of mystery behind each and every character in this story, and why they are the way they are, and what happened to them to make them this way.
It's like the same thing with the prophecy, right? Like perfect communication would solve this novel almost.
I see it. Sunday, in fact, Rebecca arrived. She was only 11 years old. She had made the difficult trip. But, I mean, to what you were saying, Jennifer, hence 100 Years of Solitude.
Yeah, like each character, because I really didn't understand this, because to me, solitude sounds like sort of a nice word that, you're alone. But it's more like isolation. And I wonder the translation, how, I guess it is a sort of a special kind of aloneness. But I think the way that each of these characters experiences solitude, the marriage from, oh God, I have the chart for all these characters, but the marriage between Jose Arcadia Segundo and Fernanda and is he the one with the mistress that he loves so much?
Yeah.
The isolation within that marriage. And there's it's like the ways in which we experience being isolated or alone in our lives. Each of these characters has done this and has experienced it in their own way. They all represent the different ways in which we can become isolated or alone or in solitude in life. And I think for me, I just see an overwhelming repetition of the idea of, if we pass on our information, if we talk with one another, if we communicate about what's going on, if we don't rewrite history, if we aren't afraid to speak the truth of our past, then we are not doomed to repeat these things. But until we do that, we're going to continue to have all of these problems. And I don't know that I can really defend that any more than just that's just what showed up for me.
Except that at the end of the book, when he discovers that book at the end, the tome,
it was written, yeah,
and which was a history. It was a written history of the Buendia family, but all written before it happened, taking place inside almost in one instant.
Well, I mean, I think, isn't that an interesting thing to think of this tome that he read and that had already been written, right? Think of it as a history book, right? Like if they could have read it, perhaps it would have been different, thus underlining the importance of, sharing the experiences as they really happen so that, others may learn from them. I guess that's what I took away, but maybe I'm way off,
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with you. And I think this may come from out of a South American perspective on tradition, family, and history. But I think when that tome or that manuscript or whatever was discovered at the end, and it was the story of, or the history of the Buendia family written before it happened. Again, another very important theme, I think, which is time. And I think that obviously is connected with memory. It's all intertwined. But, again, I see what you're saying and I agree with what you're saying. But in a way, I don't think Marquez is necessarily saying that because I don't think it's possible, given the structure of the novel and the fact that at the end, what they find is this manuscript that was written of the family's history before the family history took place.
Couldn't that just be a metaphor, though? Like it says, races condemned to 100 years of solitude did not have a second opportunity on Earth. So
totally a caution there, right?
Right. I mean, that's the kind of thing of, it's like, if you're in a situation, where your truth is not shared, where everything is isolated, when it says solitude there, I mean, to me, it seems like a not sharing of information. That's obviously, clearly I'm beating a dead horse. So that's what I see when I see that. So if you're not sharing, the information is not passed on down, then.
Totally. I just wanted to, because I feel like maybe you feel like you're out there on the wind and I want to let you know you got an anchor here. I completely see what you're saying and I think it's accurate. I think that I would just distinguish between maybe like what our takeaway is and what maybe, and I don't think you were even saying this. So like approaching the novel with they could have, or that this was for them. I feel like this was stuff that happened to people in order that we can see it maybe in a certain. It's not that they could have been more communicative, because Ursula wanted to communicate, like this was a part of her story and trying to work with the family and preserve things. And she tried her damnedest not to have history give her a pig baby, and that's not how it worked out. And even if these guys could have read the parchment, so what for them? They had their life that they had to lead. Like it wasn't a prescription. It was just that like, hey, here is your life. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't like some powerful tool or whatever.
Can I, connecting to Jennifer's theory here, can I read a passage from Octavio Paz? I'm sorry. I think it sheds a lot of light. He's talking about Mexicans in particular here, but elsewhere in this essay, Labyrinth of Solitude, he says that he thinks this applies in its own way to just about everywhere in Latin America and probably any number of third world situations. What he says is this: the Mexican does not transcend his solitude. On the contrary, he locks himself up in it. We live in our solitude like Philoctetes on his island, fearing rather than hoping to return to the world. We cannot bear the presence of our companions. We hide within ourselves, except when we rend ourselves open in a frenzy. The solitude in which we suffer has no reference either to a redeemer or a creator. We oscillate between intimacy and withdrawal, between a shout and a silence, between fiesta and awake, without ever truly surrendering ourselves. Our indifference hides life behind a death mask. Our wild shout rips off this mask and shoots into the sky, where it swells, explodes, and falls back in silence and defeat. Either way, the Mexican shuts himself off from the world, from life and from death. I don't know how the hell this all connects.
Well, hold on. I've got a direct quote from the novel. It's one sentence. The secret of a good old age is simply an honorable pact with solitude. So that seems to say, hey, if you want to get by, pull away.
I think there's a distinct cultural difference between our experience and the South American experience of solitude, time, and history, tradition.
Well, yeah, but maybe I think it's understandable if we get to solitude with A, B, and C definitions here. And if we can get to maybe understanding, let's say, solitude as the primary mode of consciousness, that it's yourself. And dealing with that struggle can be culturally adaptable, so you might deal with the self by losing the self, say, in meditation or what have you. But we can still understand that, like, what's going on and get at it, I think, because it's a real issue to deal with. I mean, especially like old age in like American culture, right? Like we forget about our aged ones. And we have a tendency to look at youth and that kind of stuff. So anyhow, I would just put that there too.
It's like an emotional disconnection from the past, I think, is also a critical thing here. Like you're not from anywhere. We're not connected to anywhere. I mean, the nature of modern trade and travel, right, is to kind of disconnect people and leave them on the road and kind of disconnected from whatever their prior story was. And I think, this is most apparent sort of in maybe a Latin American context or possibly other third world contexts as well. I think this is a history, right? It's a history in some sort of way. It's an attempt to make sense of history, to my mind, at least.
You mean on Marquez's part?
Yeah.
History of a family. But then at the end, think about why it's structured this way. At the end, that notion of history, which was documented, but written before the history occurred. What is he saying there?
Well, I mean, I think that one thing that people can get caught up on when thinking of like predetermination, right? It was written, so must it have been? It only really boggles or seems like a paradox when we consider there's free will rather than just will, that we have some kind of tap to a infinite source and all you have to do is tap harder and you can pull yourself up by your, but rather this seems more understandable if we just get that everybody has will. You don't know how much of it you've got. And the interplay of that is like a physical system. You just have to let the thing run. And so these people are all just running what happens. And that does look like something. You could maybe even see it before, but it wouldn't be any use. And it's not of use to these guys. In fact, whenever they think that they're trying to hold on to, now going back to Jose Arcadio, whenever he gets these glimpses of the future, the Village of Ice, he gets it wrong and he's like, oh, well, maybe it was mirrors, and he's not able to grasp it. And he ruins his wife's gold stash at first because he's trying to harness these metaphysical truths into physical reality and getting it wrong. Maybe I'll stop there because I think I've made a couple of points, but what would be the point there? I mean, just that it's not so, it's not like, oh, well, this is like an evil God who wrote a terrible story for these people to be through. It's no, there's people with their limitations interacting, and that has an actual story.
I think my question has to do with the time aspect. And what is Marquez saying?
I think what's interesting is that, it's 100 years, right? And it's sort of the length that I've been thinking about this a lot since I have this 95-year-old neighbor. And I just thought, as I talked to him, what perspective will be lost once he passes on? And I thought it's about 100 years of time that it takes for us to sort of forget in the way that you remember something emotionally. We can always know history by looking in history books. But for those of us who've experienced 9/11, we have a much different, but when the people who first experienced 9/11 are gone, it will just be like D-Day for us because we don't have that same emotional connection, right? So it's kind of that length of period of time that it takes to sort of forget an event in the way that you would remember it if those who have the experience of it remember it. That's kind of what I've noticed about 100 years. Does anybody have any other thought about why it's 100 years of solitude?
Can I just say one thing and then I'll kick it back over? Like, Laura, I do think that time is not, we need to change how we think about time, I guess is what I'm suggesting, because we do get a story of time, but that time includes subjective phenomenal experience. And that itself, and we see both, and we're in a unique position because we get to see what these characters thought. Again, we get to see that Ursula didn't want a pig baby and then has no way of knowing that a pig baby was born. And we also know that no one around them and the pig baby know that Ursula didn't want that to happen. And so we do get this story of time, but it's a little bit more involved. I mean, it's a little bit more embodied so that we're looking at people's experience of time, and that is a story of time also.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. Plus, I just want to say that Ursula's fear came out because she ended up marrying her cousin, right?
Well, he wanted to, yeah. I mean, that's involved, and we can talk about that, but I don't want to get too far
incest
away.
all over the place in this book, which is another interesting issue, and I don't know if that, whatever, but...
Another form of solitude, maybe, huh, guys?
Keep it in the family. But anyway, that's not the point. I mean, I hear what you're saying, and I don't disagree with you at all, but I the only thing, I guess, in terms of that just jumps out at me, and maybe this is cultural, I don't know, because I did see this secondary source when I was reading about memory, which obviously is all about time, and he was talking about how the problem with this, the insomnia plague, where memory loss is just so critical, part of it is a symptom, that he was saying that, modernization by several symbolic methods depicted in the novel inflicts forgetfulness in the subjects of the traditional life world and replaces the traditional sacred concepts with new instrumental ones and replaces the myth-religious metaphysics with materialistic ones, which is like, putting the names of the cow. And thus, the traditional worldview loses its sacredness and gradually fades away from the minds of its subjects, and therefore from the life world itself. Now, I understand that, and that's like a fear or concern about what the loss of memory does in this book and in the world. But again, this whole book is about 100 years of solitude. Solitude in and of itself probably is tied into some kind of memory loss or memory change or memory alteration. But then at the end of this book, this long, amazing book about these 5-6 generations of family, we're told this was written before it happened. See, to me, I know what you're saying, Nathan, but to me, in a way, it's kind of erasing itself.
Oh, yeah, it totally does erase itself. It's kind of like antimatter meeting matter. You know what I mean? It's like the pro experience of the life and then the negative construction, and then he's reading it and it's even as he read the pages, the wind was being, you know what I mean? So totally being erased. But
yeah, because then the house was completely knocked down by the hurricane at that moment.
Yeah. So I'm still agreeing with you. I'm trying to figure out, okay, so is there more to that?
No, my point being is, my concern is, it's a concern that comes out of confusion and that I think is a cultural difference. But the fact that at the very end of this novel, it not only is this hurricane hitting and knocking down this iconic house where the 6 generations of families lived into these amazing things. The house is completely obliterated, and he comes across this parchment that says it's essentially the history of this family written long before the history occurred. And to me, that strangeness of time use, to me, it's like erasing everything.
It's not an erasure. It's just an acknowledgement, though. I mean, like, it doesn't erase. It just, like, so these guys wanted to reach the ephemeral, eternal, or whatever. And by doing that, you give up the form. You know, like, there's no place for you to live outside of your life.
That's fine.
I don't know, but that's like, I don't understand the confusion then.
It's not so much a question of confusion as maybe concern, I guess.
No, oh yeah, it's very concerning.
Yeah, I'm distressed by this process.
Sure.
I think it's interesting that these parchments were sort of hacked away at, right? If I'm remembering correctly, by each member, somebody from each generation. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah.
These are parchments given by Melquiades, who sort of like had, the Nostradamus sort of piece of the key. Like, this was going to be revealing something so magical and amazing, and that's why they kept hacking away at it. And to discover at the end that this thing that they had been hacking away at was just what their life was, I think is just hugely significant. I think that in and of itself is something really meaningful, that all their lives in their forms of solitude, these members each one tried to decipher this thing that was supposedly going to be so helpful. And it ended up just being what they would have known if they kind of went out and lived life. Do you see, like, isn't that?
No, absolutely. And I mean, I think that this whole idea as a cautionary tale goes back to that last line. You do not have a second opportunity at life, you don't get it again. You get what you got.
For those condemned to 100 years of solitude don't. But it doesn't, to me, that means that those who do not have the 100 years of solitude do have a second opportunity. That's the subtext that I read there.
Interesting. Okay. But that would have to be another race, wouldn't it? And we're not a part of that.
I don't know about the term race.
I mean, the race in terms human.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah, I'm not saying race as like a different, I'm saying, groups of people, cultures.
But the race of human would include all human culture. So you can't, as a human being, get outside of this solitude, is my read.
Oh, no, see, I didn't read it that way. That's interesting. I mean, I don't think you can get outside of solitude. I think that's probably part of it too, that there is always the way in which we cannot really escape the fact that in the end, we're just sort of in it alone. You can only have so much knowing of another person and bonding and sharing. And in the end, you're kind of left alone in the world.
But there's two definitions of solitude that we end up using, I think, confusedly. Because, like, if we take solitude as being like the personal option and to withdraw, then we might say something like, that's different from like the solitude again of like the human experience, which I take to be a race of creatures condemned to 100 years of solitude, which is the personal, again, primary mode of consciousness, like get yourself, and that's what you have. But the thing this story might say is that, like, everyone born with solitude should not seek solitude. Again, a definition like solitude, human creatures, and the choice to do it, because that's where I think there's a bit of a difference or a play with the word. Because you can be a creature of solitude and live your life. But if you seek it out and try and get beyond your, through yourself beyond, then you can easily escape your own life and have a story about how you escaped your own life by like reading documents. And that's what's seen at the end.
That's what happened here.
Yeah.
That's what was discovered when he discovered the parchment.
Yes. Yeah, that's what happened. And I think that maybe in order to nail this, who was it exactly that found the parchments? Because his discovery of the parchment and his relationship to the parchment is different from everyone else's. Jose Arcadio's primarily because he saw it. Yeah, so I forget his story a little bit, but it would be important because he only has a piece of the parchment story. Everyone else spent their lives making it, or contributing to it, or wondering about it, and
he's the one who gave birth to the pigtail baby.
Oh, yeah, I know that. Yeah, certainly. But I wonder what the circumstances of his life were to maybe get more out of this, out of the metaphor, for him as a character, not for the story, because I think it holds up as a grand theme, this idea of looking outward rather than homeward or something like that. But anyhow, it's not relevant. It's just that there's so many people who were involved in this, and so the same act is present, whether it's him at the end reading it or others writing it or deciphering it. They're all investigating the not here and now.
He was the one that played a major role in the strike.
Oh, was he the one that was in the murder piles?
Yeah, in the train? You mean with all the
Yeah.
dead?
Yeah.
They say very pensive.
Yeah, wow. And that's interesting for him because he's caught, just thinking out loud, between being the primary knower in that way of the massacre.
Wait. I think I'm wrong. Hold on.
Okay.
The one that discovers the parchments. Yeah, I think it's him because Jose Arcadio, the one who went to Rome to become a priest, remember? And then he comes back.
Yeah,
right?
for Amaranta.
He was killed by a bunch of teenage boys, right?
Well, yeah.
I'm looking at the last generation. Then, because time-wise, we're talking about who is it that discovered the parchment at the very end, right?
Sure, yeah. And again, I don't think this would detract whatever comes from the general thing that we get out of this point of the story at the very end. But yeah, it can be more interesting.
So Melquiades is the one who first gives the parchments, though. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So, and he also gives the elixir, which heals them of the plague, correct?
Yes. I don't know if he was alive when he did that.
He's not. He's not
alive for the first time or the second?
The second.
Second time.
And he came back because he didn't enjoy the solitude of death.
Yes.
Apparently.
Yeah.
No, I think it's the one who was in the banana factory strike and discovered all the people, because he ended up having this baby with Amaranta, right? Amaranta Ursula, I think it was, and they didn't know that they were related.
They had just known who they were. That information had just been shared.
I know. Yeah.
I know.
It's just like watching one of those comedies. It's like if you didn't have misunderstanding, you couldn't have the action.
And I'm just thinking one after another. I'm just like, really? You can't share that information? That seems pertinent.
Well, I mean, solitude. Do you share if you're in solitude?
Right. So I thought it was really interesting. You know, Ursula's form of solitude was during the time, in my mind, during the time in which she slowly sort of lost her sight and kind of shriveled up during those 4 years of rain. You remember that part? I mean, she was basically described to me. I'm picturing this sort of, you know, the humpback whale with mollusks attached to it and kind of just this withered, wet, sullen, you know, damp person that there was a description of her in there that was just like, geez, she was really, it must have been raining because it seemed like the whole house was decaying. Everything was just turning into this decayed, wet place. And when the rain stopped, it was like she came back to life again. And I did not see that coming. I was so surprised by that event and how she, you know, kind of perked right back up. They thought for sure she was gone. It was like she was in hibernation during that time. And she perked back up and she kind of brought life back to the place the way she had before. And I just wondered if anybody else remembered that part of the book or had any thoughts about it, because it was such a drastic difference. And the connection between the rain and her kind of hibernation and then the meaning behind her coming back and to life and bringing herself back to life and getting life back in the house.
In terms of the rains, you're saying that you mean she just sort of mentally disappeared?
Well, you know, it was a slow process, right? Because she first lost her sight and then she wasn't completely isolated at first, but eventually she became completely isolated to where she was sort of like a piece of furniture. And I'm going to try to find the description. You guys can talk about it.
It's similar to, I wonder if after, my timeline's blurry, but if after that is when she remembered that Rebecca was alone and she was like, oh God, Rebecca, it's been like 40 years. And then they go and try and find her and she's under earth.
This is the time that Amaranta's sewing the shroud. Is that right? Yeah. I don't remember which one happened first or second, but yeah, Ursula is just such a fascinating character, right? Because she's throughout the entire story. She's there. She's the main character. She never really kind of dies off or gets her storyline threads all the way through to the end. Pretty much the end, not quite to the end, but very close.
Yeah, I just want to clarify that if you look at the family tree, it was Aureliano, the son of Renata, that woman that was put into a nunnery, remember, by Fernanda? It was the son, Aureliana, who married her, I don't know if he married her, but had sex with Amaranta Ursula, his aunt.
Yeah.
And they're the ones that had the pigtail baby at the end. So it wasn't who I said it was.
Okay. It was a little after that. But
it's at the very bottom of the family tree. It's the last.
Yeah, in the Babylonia, I think.
Yeah, he's the son of Babylonia and Renata was put in the nunnery, and Fernanda killed Babylonia.
He's unable to move for the rest of his life, basically.
Aureliano was brought back by the nuns after Renata gave birth to him in the nunnery. And he was brought back to Fernanda, and I guess she had to take him or something, but she never told anybody that he was the child of Renata.
And why do you think that is?
Because it was shame.
Right. I mean,
shame and pride.
And then the way that this poor child dies, it's like,
it's terrible.
Just a horrifying scene. Like the baby's just sort of left there, and is it bees or what ants?
It's an ant swarm.
Ants.
Oh, basically eat the child. It's like the locusts and it's very.
So maybe I can put counterpoint here. I think I brought this up in the last conversation too, but Remedios the Beauty seems to be, I think that she's an interesting case because she is also, quote, withdrawn maybe. Like she's internal. People think she's stupid, but other characters give us to believe that she's actually beyond and is in touch with things as they are, like, more than a 20-year war veteran somehow, like is seen through the veil. And she doesn't die. She ascends.
Some of the things that she does in the story, are so outside the characteristics of everyone else in the family. She doesn't have an ego. She doesn't have pride. She is sort of really matter of fact about things. And to me, in that way, she's very different from a lot of the other characters. She's found a way that's different.
And inversely, she's materially attractive to people. So her spirit and body are interestingly connected because she doesn't give a flip about her sexuality, even though she could have every man she wants.
That's another thing. She's not self-aware of that.
Yeah, well, she is. It was funny, that guy there was a man that was peeping on her in the bathroom, and she's like clairvoyantly knows that he's going to fall and break her neck and tells him that, like, you're going to fall from up there. And then he does and die. And like, that's just, okay. Like that's just the way things are. Like I even tried to say something to you, but you did what you were going to do.
One of the things that comes up a lot is the color yellow, right? In the story.
Yellow and gold, right?
Yeah. So yellow and gold. And I don't know if you guys Googled it, but it's, the color of death, destruction, morality, change.
Wow.
Thematically, it's interesting, right?
I never associated those words with color yellow.
I did not personally either, actually. Why is the train yellow? Why are bananas? Why are the butterflies? Everything was yellow. So I was just like, let me see what yellow means.
I mean, is that a general understanding of what yellow represents?
According to like Google or so I don't know, but yeah. Those are the things that I found: death, change, destruction, morality. But this person, Remedios the Beautiful, she kind of, to me, I don't know. What would you say about her morality? I don't know. I feel like she does seem not of this world, right? She seems very not immoral, but sort of above it all. I don't know. She just somehow seems to transcend all of the typical hullabaloo that all the other Buendias engage in. And I feel like that's
she's really a strange case.
Part of why she transcended or ascended.
Yeah, I just think that if we have like fate as a caution, or fate in like death, like the mortal life and death of someone, that's kind of what I want to mean fate to be here. Like if we have all these different fates of people, she doesn't have a fate really. I mean, unless we
Remedios?
Yeah, I mean, like she ascends. Like, I mean, I guess that's a fate too, but like not in the normal way for all these others. She doesn't really have an end, Well,
this is magical realism.
And that's what makes it a little bit, hard to square this, round hole.
It's a very obvious parody of the Virgin Mary ascending into heaven. And what the hell does that mean, right?
What the hell does that mean?
I mean, if you think about the Virgin Mary, she's supposed to be sort of perfectly pure. I mean,
Did Remedios ever sleep with anybody?
No.
Yeah, I don't think so.
I just think it's interesting. Like, you've got this chick, and you can't decide if she's the stupidest person that ever walked the face of the earth, or if she's wise beyond everyone who could imagine, her or who understands her. There's only one person, I think, that seems to really feel like she's wise, right? Is that the Colonel Aureliano?
That's right.
Buendia.
Yeah.
He's the one who feels as though she has sort of a knowing, and everyone else just thinks she's, simple. So, like, if you take these things and piece them together, right, you have the fact that she's either simple or super wise, and she's got some kind of, magnetic quality that draws people to her, but when they're drawn too close to her, they die, right? Is that
Oh, well, I know that one case for sure, but I wonder if there's a pattern.
There's several that die,
Wow.
possess her, right? Trying to have her in a way.
That is that adds to something then, because then we can look at other material. So it's like indirect life, whenever you're taking, like, her life has an effect on people,
Yeah.
so it's not like we have the story of a character who no one ever interacted with and she lifted off one day. Like, she's a danger as well as being, wise.
She's and we don't know that she's wise, but I don't know. Who do you lean?
I take it as read. I mean, well, not as read, but I take it that she is, because it's explanatory. And then, I mean, from the kernel to why people would think that. And it's also a common description of people who are not conventional, but who are actually highly intelligent, that they seem stupid, can't tie their own shoes, as, that's the stereotype. But then also we get third point that I think rounds it out, is, she ascends. Like, there clearly is something about her. She's not just the basic.
And at one point she puts on a cassock. She's wearing a cassock. Isn't that
it's a priestly vestment?
A priest, yeah. Isn't that what the priests wear, right? So there's definitely the notion of some sort of Messiah-like quality to her.
Yeah, I think I'd like to read more on Marquez, personally talking about his designs or intention with magical realism, because it's, for someone who's not generating it, he's one of the few that do it. I mean, it's, again, becoming popular in film now.
But I think that I've read one of his interviews, and he doesn't seem to be, I mean, he says some stuff that's helpful, but he's not forthcoming. And I think that to some extent he is a hermetic writer. Like, he talks about, and I'm not sure even if this is serious, but he talks about how a lot of stuff that he does is like in jokes to his friends, which I sincerely doubt is the case, but, suggests that he knows how to be sly, and, that he's not going to just tell what he thinks, or at least that's my sense of what's going on here. Like, the novel generally, it's kind of opaque in a Kafkaesque kind of way, in a sense that it has stuff that seems metaphorical in some way, but you don't really know which way it's pointing. It doesn't really, it kind of teases you and kind of suggests there's some sort of meaning here, and it makes you begin to think of meanings, but it doesn't really land on a particular meaning or, a clear sense of what the design of this is, even though it's obviously intricately designed with all these repetitions. I mean, to my mind, the big question is the one that Jennifer and Nate were raising sort of indirectly in discussing the last line of, and I mean, I'll just put the question very basically. Are you saying that, and I'll fictitiously pose it to Marquez himself. Marquez, are you saying that we're supposed to do something different? Or are you saying that this is what we're going to get inevitably, and we have to sort of learn to resign ourselves to it? And if it's the latter, which to my mind seems more plausible, and if it's the latter, how in God's name does that cohere with your socialism? Supposedly he's a socialist. Supposedly, he seems to be very interested in, actually changing Latin American institutions for the better. But at the same time, this novel seems so fatalistic.
But the second chance at life part of that last quote is really important, because you get one chance at life. And so you could imagine that with that, you should execute all of your faculties towards the best things that you can imagine, even though in this novel is an acknowledgement of that, even though it's going to be what it's going to be, I guess.
Maybe the novel is itself the breaking of the solitude. Maybe there's some sort of idea like that going on.
I did read somewhere that he did not feel that this was magical.
That is super interesting. I love that.
That label, or this defining of the novel as magical realism, wasn't his. He doesn't find it to be magical at all.
That's excellent.
That doesn't surprise me at all, because, like, I think I mentioned last time that whenever you listen to, my husband's family is Peruvian, and whenever you listen to them share stories, especially the older ones, and the way that they tell the stories, you're listening and everything makes sense. And all of a sudden there's a ghost thrown in, or there's some kind of a strange event that can possibly have happened. And there's this propensity for everyone in the family that I have seen to exaggerate beyond like what is like you can't expect me to believe that, but I want to argue with you because it's on the verge of believable, but I know it's not true, so why are you saying it, kind of thing. That to me is, this book amplifies that so perfectly that I could see that he's like, oh no, this is not magical, it's just the way we talk.
This is definitely, it's cultural, I believe. And he was a journalist for many years and very politically minded. So there is a lot there, that is not, he didn't, and plus I believe that this novel is based on or comes out of his grandparents. Anyway, but before we go on, I have to leave in about 10 minutes.
Okay, yeah.
So can we, I don't know if we're going to do another last line or if we're just going to keep talking about this man.
Well, I have a specific question for Jennifer, but we can, I'll put a pin in it and we can keep talking around if we have anything else too.
Yeah.
Sure. I just want to say that I definitely think the main issue is time in this book.
For you, Laura, 335, page 335. What did you expect? He murmured. Time passes. That's how it goes, Ursula said, but not so much. That's like
yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
So what was your question?
I wonder, and I'm really not goofing. Do you know anything about Latin American beliefs in extraterrestrials?
Well, I mean, do you know anything about Peru at all? It's like the funniest thing ever for you to ask that, because there's like the Nazca lines and there's the Machu Picchu and there's so much mystery shrouding all of these cultures, and the idea that the people of Machu Picchu just sort of vanished. They don't know what happened to them. They have their buildings, but they don't have any evidence of the people. And if you go to Peru and you talk to people about these events, there's all kinds of folklore, I guess you would call it, around. And I don't know if it's extraterrestrials, but I think that idea was floated to me at one point when I was going to the Nazca Line Museum. And I think there's even movies that are based on that. And now they have all kinds of National Geographic shows that, okay, it wasn't aliens. This is how they could have done it. This is why they might have done it. And all of that, but that's not the prevailing wisdom.
And I kind of also wonder, why the hell is the book in Melquiades' prophecy? Why is it in Sanskrit, which suggests a comparison to Indian polytheism and its own sort of cyclical patterns? And I don't know. I mean, so I kind of wonder if there's a mind connection or something like that, or I don't know.
The more I spend time with this story, the more I like it. And I wouldn't say I like it in the sense that it's not to me an uplifting novel, but I do feel like it's a cautionary tale. And when I walk away from this book, I think I need to live my life. I need to be open and honest. These are the things that I take away. So if you don't know what the themes are, what are you left with at the end of reading this? You say we don't know what the themes are. What are you left with after reading this?
Not try and live your life. A lot of literature points to that, but it's really hard to do. I don't know.
So the question is, like, what's the big upshot of the novel?
It's just like, clearly we don't all agree on what the major point is, if there is a major point. So then what do you walk away from this feeling, generally speaking?
Careful projecting too. I mean, like, you don't want to. Go ahead.
To me, I'm just left with the contradiction of times. What I'm left.
What does that mean?
What is happening isn't necessarily happening. That what is happening could have already happened, and what is happening could already have been written down somewhere, or it's not happening. I just found a very intense, unavoidable reality or lack of reality in terms of time and how I should perceive it and how I should experience it.
Normal time, cause and effect, right?
Get the word normal out of there. There's nothing.
Well, I'm just saying, but hold on. But but normally we think of things in terms of cause and effect. That something, if it's written, then and that's not exactly how this is playing out. The time is acting differently. So that's why I'm saying it's not, that normal ways of time need to be reimagined.
Yeah, absolutely. And then it's not linear. It's not linear.
Yeah. So, I mean, that something can be written before, I guess, is again just a concern. Also, interestingly.
Right, like time does pass, but not so much because it isn't linear and it sort of spirals, and what you think thousands of years ago touch things of today, and we don't really see how and know why, but it still does.
Exactly, and you may have already been there.
my sense of what the novel, I mean, what I take away from the novel is that there is a human nature and we are condemned to it. That's what that's my
no.
sense.
Say it so.
Yeah, the realizing of this helps to solve the problem in some way because
Yeah.
it kind of level sets expectations and sort of maybe what you'd need to do in response. I mean, all these people, all these crazy people running around everywhere in this novel doing revolutions and this and that, lack a certain amount of perspective.
Yeah.
They lack a certain amount of understanding of what their problems and motivations are. And, you get maybe a better chance. We get the better chance as a reader taking into account the nature of humanity as presented in this book. And we are disconnected from our past in a really kind of disturbing way. I mean, obviously I'm not Latin American. Haven't been disconnected from my Incan past or whatever, but I remember when my Italian grandfather died. One of the most disturbing things in my mind was it was like the last kind of connection to Italy. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it was a weird. I should explain, even though my last name's Johnson, my mom is Italian and her last name is Michelotti. But it's something that's present. It's common in the world more and more of just not having any history or connection to the past, or there's kind of a increasing sense of solitude in the world as become more atomized. And in that sense, I feel like the novel is also speaking to that to some extent, even though it obviously is primarily concerned with the Latin American situation.